What if the staircase you climb every morning isn't just a staircase, but the faint echo of something older, stranger, and dangerously magnetic? What if every rung you grasp, the promotion ladder, the rehab ladder, the ladder in your dreams that sways under an invisible wind, remembers the first dare, leave the ground? Tonight we chase the most persistent vertical line in the human imagination, a symbol drawn not in ink, but in hunger, the ladder. It rises where language runs out, in deserts and sanctuaries, on tomb walls and tracing boards, coiled into nightmares and carved into initiation rites. The ladder is the promise that there is an upstairs to reality, a loft above the ceiling of the visible world. It appears early, and it refuses to retire. In Mesopotamia, priests climbed terraced mountains of fired clay, the ziggurats, because they believed gods might draw nearer if humans met them halfway. The architecture is subtle propaganda, each step a syllable in the sentence, we can climb to them. In the Hebrew imagination, a long night on the road opens into a vision, a man alone on the stones and a ladder standing on earth with its head in the sky. You know the scene, Jacob the fugitive sleeping on a borrowed rock, then the sudden fissure in the dark. Angels ascending and descending, messenger traffic like sparks in a transmission line, and above them, a voice naming promises older than Jacob's pulse. The story doesn't give us a blueprint, it gives us a direction, up, down. It implies connection where we expected separation. The place is named Bethel, the house of God, because there the ladder grazed the world. It wasn't a temple. The ladder made the ground a temple. The image spread like wildfire through centuries of interpretation. Some tried to measure it. How tall is the distance between worlds? Others tried to moralize it. Which rung are you on? But the earliest echoes are startlingly literal and startlingly diverse. In ancient Egypt, copies of the Coffin texts and later the Book of the Dead include spells for a ladder, a mycute, offered to the deceased so they can scale the sky. There are even depictions of twin ladders, one for Horus and one for Set, ladders as rival roads that lead upwards. The dead weren't expected to sprout wings, they were expected to climb. Look farther east and the ladder becomes a rope, a tree, a rainbow, a bridge, with the same gravitational pull. In shamanic traditions across Siberia and Central Asia, the drum or pole or birch tree used in rites becomes a makeshift elevator, a ladder to the upper world where spirits are consulted and bargains are struck. The Norse chose a tree so vast it had to be a map, Yggdrasil, with branches reaching heaven and roots biting into the underworld, a living ladder threaded through 3 realms. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest emerged from ritual kivas via a wooden ladder, a seasonal rehearsal of humanity's ascent from a previous world. Different continents, same vertical grammar. By the time the Romans bring Mithra into their secret caverns, the ladder has matured into a technology of rank. In the Mithraic mysteries, some sources speak of 7 grades of initiation, sometimes linked to a ladder of 7 rungs, each rung a metal corresponding to a planet, lead, tin, iron, gold, and so on, each with a gatekeeper, each rung a pressure test. A soul climbs by becoming lighter. The motif carries a physics of spirit. Ascent means refinement, and every rung burns. Mystics saw themselves on it. Philosophers drew diagrams around it. Historians find it in the dust of burnt-out sanctuaries and in the ink of marginal notes. Psychologists, late to the feast, point at it and whisper, aspiration. The ladder casts a long shadow in the mind's basement. Dreams where you climb and the rungs grow soft. Dreams where a rung is missing. Dreams where the ladder leans into nothing. Analysts hear a confession, the sense that life is vertical, values are vertical, time itself a stairwell we are forever catching our breath inside. But symbols don't live in dictionaries, they live in stories. So listen, there's another night, centuries after Jacob, and this time the dream belongs to a monk on a desert mountain. John of the Ladder, John Climacus, writes a book called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's a manual for an impossible climb. 30 rungs, each rung a virtue, each rung a fight. The image that became iconic, literally, is the painting. Robed figures laboring up a ladder toward a small Christ at the top, while demons swarm and yank them off. It is not a subtle metaphor. The climb allows falling. The fall is dramatic. The whole thing is a warning disguised as a promise. The top exists, but gravity is not imaginary. The ladder is also a language of revolt. In the story of Babel, a human tower reaches into the sky, and God scatters the builders. But read it beside the ziggurat steps. The ancient world is testing where the ceiling is. How high is too high? A strict reading says the upward urge is pride. A looser reading says the urge is innate, and pride is what happens when we forget who we are on the way up. Either way, the ladder marks a boundary. Climb, but know why. Sufism names the prophet's night journey the mirage, a word that can mean ladder, an ascent through 7 heavens with a guide at each passage. Kabbalah draws worlds on parchment, connecting them with pathways that feel like a double helix of ladders. And though wood never appears, the image is stubbornly vertical. There is more above, and there are ways to move. Even outside scripture, the philosopher's great chain of being reads like a frozen ladder. Hierarchies of life stacked from stones up through angels. In every case, there is a grammar to this verticality. Rungs, levels, thresholds. We keep thinking in stairs. Of course, the ladder doesn't only go up. It must go down, or the story ends too soon. Angels descend in Jacob's dream as well as ascend. In Egyptian texts, Osiris has ladders in both directions because resurrection requires descent and return. The shaman climbs to ask for healing, then descends carrying instructions or a piece of the sky's medicine. Even the corporate cliché, climbing the ladder, concedes a darker side, the fall. Lose your job and you fall down a rung or two. Lose your reputation and you fall a few floors. We talk like that because we feel like that. It is more than poetry. It is a mapping felt in muscle memory. There is a reason ladders haunt horror. Think of any scene in which a character must climb a narrow metal ladder into the dark above. Shoes clanging, breath echoing, a sense of exposure, and the abyss both below and above. Ladders are thresholds, and thresholds are where monsters like to wait. In the 1990 psychological thriller, named after the biblical image, the ladder becomes less a prop than a diagnosis. A man's mind turning his life into an ascent that might actually be a descent. The symbol doesn't care which way you're headed. It only demands that you choose and pay. Historically, you can watch the ladder trace the edges of power. Masonic tracing boards from the 18th and 19th centuries depict Jacob's ladder as 3 virtues: faith, hope, charity, ascending toward a blended celestial vault, and initiates were taught to climb by embodying them. It's not theology so much as pedagogy, the climb as curriculum. Older yet, Egyptian funerary art sometimes gives the dead a literal ladder amulet, as if packing a travel accessory. You'll need this. When archaeology uncovers such trinkets, it's tempting to call them superstition, but that impatience ignores the human insistence that the soul moves in more directions than one. Meanwhile, psychologists like Jung look at ladders in dreams and hear an archetype of individuation, the ego moving toward the self, rung by rung, with the caveat that inflation, the feeling of touching heaven, is where the demons wait to pull you down. Cognitive scientists point out that across languages, verticality codes value. We feel up as good, down as bad. We are cheered up or let down. We are uplifted by music and depressed by headlines. A ladder collects those metaphors into one tool and points it at the sky. You are going to climb something today. The ladder is why. In the modern world, the symbol goes incognito and works its magic anyway. Astronauts ride gantries that look suspiciously like ladders to sit atop candles and be hurled into night. Mountaineers speak of ladders spanning crevasses as if they were scalloped pages between chapters of a book, each rung a letter that spells, "Keep moving." In urban life, stairwells spiral into infinity, fire escapes perch like rib cages on the skins of old buildings, and street photographers angle upward, catching a rectangle of sky crisscrossed by the black diagonals of iron steps. In Logos, stylized ladders promise elevation, improvement, solution. On skin, inked ladders lean toward moons or spines. The old symbol is talking, the language changed, but the message undimmed. And yet the ladder is often missing a practical detail, the angle. A ladder can be set too steep, it can slip, it can stand on bad ground. Our grandparents learned this in the same breath they learned what to be proud of. Too much ambition and the climb is fatal. Too little and you never leave the earth. The symbol is honest. It doesn't promise safety, only direction. The stories that feature it, monks, monarchs, mystics, mechanics, share a common mood, a seriousness that recognizes cost. This isn't the elevator. You feel every rung in your hands, every rung in your lungs. If you felt yourself climbing in recent months toward healing, or toward a degree, or toward a quieter mind, and you felt the old gravity tugging at your ankles, consider this a small lantern in your pocket. Symbols are not just ink on a page. They are tools for memory. The ladder reminds that motion happens in increments, that ascents include pauses, that falling is not the same as failing. And if you hunger for more of these archetypal maps, strange, dark, and useful, stay with us. Subscribe and share this with the one person who always reaches for the next rung before you do. There's space on this ladder for two, and the next story waits above us. We should be honest about what history does to symbols. It complicates them. The Mithraic rungs map to planets, a cosmology of metals and moods. Kabbalistic tradition sometimes draws a ladder as a bridge between the Sephirot, the emanations of the divine, framing spiritual labor as a coordinated climb through attributes toward a unity that can't be drawn. The Sufi mirage, treated by poets as the gold standard of ascent, has inspired centuries of art that treats the heavens as a structured penthouse with floors that teach and floors that test. Meanwhile, secular philosophy's great chain of being became the scaffolding for natural history, sometimes for good, too often for ranking lives, a misuse that reminds us. Every ladder can be weaponized by those who forget ladders were made for reaching, not for pushing. Because ladders are liminal, folklore puts spirits on them. In rural traditions in Europe, leaving a ladder flat on a house on certain nights invited unwanted traffic. In parts of the Middle East, ladders as amulets warded off what wanted to climb down. In children's rhymes, snakes share the board with ladders because we instinctively understand that ascent and descent are neighbors, that the straight path up and the coiled path down are part of the same game. The snake is the underside of the ladder. The ladder is the antidote to the snake. The board is life, and the dice are ungovernable. Consider also how often ladders appear at births and deaths, the two apertures that reality rarely decorates. Midwives in some folk accounts hid or inverted ladders to confuse spirits who might climb into a newborn's life. Funeral lore packed ladders for the dead. In one medieval legend, a penitent bishop dreams of a ladder whose rungs are woven from people he wronged. He can only climb if he reconciles. It's a brutal but precise moral technology. Your ascent is braided from the lives you touch. You can't step on a name and expect the rung to hold. Then there are the ladders that are not ladders at all, but pretend convincingly. The lab bench cluttered with retorts and alembics in an alchemist's den, a scroll unfurled showing 7 stages of transformation, each a rung that changes lead to gold, but mostly changes the alchemist. The ladder is metaphor baked into method. Or take the therapist's office where a client draws a ladder of values, highest at the top, most urgent in the middle, trivialist at the bottom, and spends weeks climbing from sorry to solid. A gym coach writes a ladder of reps on a whiteboard, numbers increasing, challenge mounting. The body learns what the soul already knew. We are tempted to seek a clean origin, to say the ladder symbol began here. But symbols are rivers with tributaries. Mesopotamian temples that rose like steps, Egyptian spells that coached the dead, Hebrew narratives that turned wilderness campsites into gateways, Greek and Roman cults that staged climactic progressions, Norse myth that made an arbor out of everything, Islamic visions that measured the sky from within. And in the spaces between, the human nervous system's fondness for up and down seeded the ground for these flowers. You don't need to believe in anything to understand the ladder. You just need to have wanted to be more than you were, and to have felt how dangerous that wanting can be. Modern echoes proliferate because the symbol is cheap to build and expensive to ignore. Creative writing classes teach the ladder of abstraction, from concrete detail at the bottom to airy ideas at the top. Good prose, like a good climb, touches every rung. Tech startups pitch the ladder of adoption, getting from prototypes to people who care. Their decks often include an icon of a ladder tucked in the corner, as if to confess, the climb is inescapable. Tattoos of ladders lean into moons, spinal columns, or wrists. I've seen one that ends below the person's pulse, which feels like a boast and a dare. I carry my ascent under the skin, and there's a darker modern echo none of us can skip. Social life is gamified into ladders, and we check our rank as if the numbers can tell us how high the sky is. Followers, steps, levels. We wake in the night with the sense we're sliding, and the past few years have taught us the difference between an elevator with music and a ladder with splinters. If you need music to climb, you will climb less often. If you accept splinters, you may one day find yourself higher than you thought possible. What do philosophers do with the ladder? Some, like Wittgenstein, say, throw it away after you climb it. The propositions that helped you reach clarity are discarded once you see. That, too, is a ritual of ascent. Others argue that ladders are illusions, that the world is a flat field and we invented the stairs. Their argument falters not in logic but in blood. Try telling a frightened child on the 3rd rung of a bunk bed that height is imaginary. The truth, uncomfortable and necessary, is that both are true. The world is richer than our diagrams, and still, the diagrams have gotten us through nights that would have swallowed us whole. A ladder drawn on a scrap of paper can be a map of tomorrow morning. If you're looking for rules, use these instead of commandments. Choose your ladder carefully. Some ladders go up to empty attics full of dust and the smell of forgotten cardboard. Some ladders lead to roofs where the night air is honest. Test your rungs. You will be tempted to count them, to compare ladders, to envy slopes. None of that helps. The best ladders are the ones you're on in the dark while no one watches, the ones leading to a room with a window you've never looked through. And when you arrive, don't mistake height for sight. Some views are better from the 2nd floor than the 10th. I keep returning to the simplest image, a wooden ladder leaned against a wall of sky, the first rung warm from the last hand that held it, the top disappearing into stars that resemble feathers. Somewhere else, in another century, another hand is reaching. A monk is setting his foot just so. A warrior is stepping onto a metal rung that will tremble before it supports him. A child is climbing into a treehouse while the whole world looks away. The symbol will not save them, but it will inform their posture. And posture matters when gravity remembers your name. Some final, quiet facts, grounded in history, because we are not here to preach, but to understand. The Egyptian ladder spells are numbered and catalogued. They were not fantasies but procedures, the way you might write instructions for a pilot. The Mithraic ladder may be more text than iron, but it was real in underground rooms lit by oil and secrecy. The Mirage is a tapestry of hadith and commentary, a carefully measured ascent more mathematical than mythic in some readings. The ladder of divine ascent has been copied and kissed by believers who knew the demons were real, not because of horns, but because of habits. You will find the ladder wherever humans suspect the world is layered, and you will find dissenters who say the world is a single floor. Pay attention to both. The debate itself illuminates the rungs. Jacob woke and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he set up a stone, and poured oil, and named the space a gate. That is one way to end a story, with oil and a vow. Another way is to carry the ladder with you after you've climbed it. Not the object, but the posture it taught you. Steady hands, patient lungs, a willingness to look down and not be undone. In a world that still builds towers and still fears them, a world that still paints trees on clinic walls, because we need to be reminded of up, the ladder remains the most honest thing we've ever built in our minds. 2 rails, many rungs, and at the top, not a reward, but a threshold. Walk through.